with empowerment and so forth. And
yeah, I mean, yes, actually, if we do it right, then definitely getting an empowerment first. And then, anyway, it's quite terse, so I don't think it's that easy to understand. And
we have enough to study from the teaching itself without going into these articles. But okay.
Yeah, well,
it's available.
Interested. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. As usual, but again, very, very, very pleasure to meet you all. I'm very happy in this occasion of these teachings, so precious, and we are very appreciative. I'm saying it every week, but I feel it every time as fresh as at the beginning. Today we are in teaching number 82. It's hard to believe how extensive these teachings are. So thank you, Geshe, so much for everyone here. We're so appreciative, and we are very, very, very lucky, fortunate, and grateful. Let's enjoy the teaching. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leora. All right, so let's start. As usual, we start, of course, with some meditation. Breathing meditation first, just to settle the mind. And as always, think that Buddha Shakyamuni is in the space in front of you, appearing as a fully ordained monk. With saffron-colored robes. Seated on an open lotus flower. A sun and a moon disk. Embodying all enlightened beings. Serving as an object of refuge, but also as a guide to enlightenment. And being inseparable from your Lama. And the Buddha is surrounded by great masters, the masters of India, especially of the Nalanda tradition. Those of Tibet. And those of other traditions, Buddhist traditions. All of them inspiring and also guiding us. Serving as our object of refuge. Even if you can't visualize all of them, they don't appear clearly to your mind, just feel their presence. And then think that you're surrounded by all sentient beings. For whose sake we are practicing the Dharma. All of them having a mind that is the same nature as the mind of the Buddha. Whose afflictions are not in the nature of their mental consciousness. And therefore can be removed. And have suffered greatly because of their root ignorance and all the other afflictions giving rise to harmful actions. Think that it is up to us to take responsibility since we found the path to enlightenment. Take responsibility for each one of them. And so let's first generate affectionate love, a sincere sense of affection, care, and closeness towards all sentient beings. Even if they're troublesome, even if they create a lot of problems. And that affectionate love then gives way to great compassion, focusing in particular on all the obstructions that sentient beings carry in their mind right now. Obstructions in the form of afflictions, karmic seeds, and other imprints causing great sufferings, mental and physical, and preventing them from becoming liberated or even enlightened. Generate an affectionate mind that wishes for each one of them to be free from these obstructions. May they be free from all their limitations and the causes of those limitations. And may I be able to lead them to a state where they're free from them, free from those obstructions. And that aspiration then grows stronger. It turns into determination. The determination to lead all sentient beings to the state where they're free from their physical and mental obstructions. And that way we generate the altruistic attitude. Try to really feel that deep love and care that is at the same time determined to benefit sentient beings in that way. Since we can only realistically fulfill this aspiration, this determination, we're enlightened first. Generate the aspiration or even determination to become fully enlightened in order to lead all sentient beings to liberation or even the state of a Buddha. And it's also with this mind, the motivation to become fully enlightened, that we continue to study Chandrakirti's treatise on the middle way. And so then focusing on the Buddha in front of us and those surrounding him and focusing on all sentient beings, we take refuge in generate the mind of enlightenment. With the prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And once again, deepen your love and compassion for sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then direct to death, the Buddhas and the great masters around the Buddha. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. Turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay. Then for this coming week, as usual, well, as usual means this time we'll continue, move on to the next of the minds we need to generate before we can generate bodhicitta. So it's the altruistic attitude, which really is just a strengthened version, and you know that from our initial meditation. So it's a strengthened version. It's the determined version of great compassion. So it's the mind that is determined to become fully enlightened. Usually how it's expressed in Tibetan is like a mind that feels, I myself will do this, I myself. So it's not just the wish, may I be able to do so, may I be able to lead sentient beings towards a state free from suffering and its causes, and even more so towards a state free from all their limitations. But it's a mind that's determined to do so. So I'll do whatever I can. So this strong determination. So what to say about it? I mean, it's not much explanation. I mean, it's really hard to do, of course. It's like the other states of mind. Because of our self-centeredness, it's hard. That's the main obstacle. Our own self-cherishing mind is in the way towards really sincerely feeling that. But the only way to overcome that is to become more familiar with it. Just as we've become very familiar with the self-centered mind, we've been familiar with it over lifetimes. But even when we were born, that kind of coarse type of mind initially wasn't there, but we then refamiliarized with it. And I don't know, for however many years, we've become very familiar with it, such that, well, it's there at all times. It comes back again and again. So something upsets us, or I don't know, we grow attached throughout the day. I mean, the more mindful we become, the more aware we become of the self-centered, the self-cherishing type of mind that is attached to myself, my happiness before anyone else's. And since we reinforce that, we need to now reinforce or enforce, at least we need to enforce, we need to familiarize with the opposite force, others before self. And others before self, not just attachment, which is kind of like a wishful kind of mind. It can be determined. Of course, it can be a determined type of attachment. But it has the same function is at work here, like the wish, my own well-being, my own benefit before anyone else's. I'm determined to accomplish my own benefit. So it's quite similar. Well, self-cherishing, and of course the other minds it gives rise to, the other mental factors it gives rise to. So now we replace it with a force which is focused mainly on other sentient beings. And for this week, it's this determination. So to start off with a wish, of course, and that grows stronger then, and being determined, no matter what, I'll do this. And sometimes it seems forced, but when the self-cherishing mind arises, instead of applying logic right away, we can do that, but that may take a while. But sometimes, even if it seems forced, but we are familiar with this mind, we like this kind of mind. And so to just go, no, whatever self-cherishing there is, never mind, I'm not going to be carried away by that. I'm determined. I want to benefit all sentient beings. So sometimes just that reminder may help us to, in that moment, at least take away the force of the self-cherishing mind. But the self-cherishing mind creeps in all the time. So it's so cheeky. It's almost like it takes on any disguise, even the Dharma disguise. So it deceives us. Oh, I'm such a good practitioner. Oh, I'm so selfless. So it's right there. We need to really learn to recognize it. But definitely a powerful antidote. I don't know, we have a lot of air traffic today. I don't know whether you can hear it. You may not be able to hear it, but it's quite noisy today. I live near an airport, so that's why. Okay, anyway, so we need this type of mind, and let's make an extra effort for this coming week. And then once we've generated it again and again throughout the day, well, next step is bodhicitta, so might as well go all the way to generating bodhicitta. And of course, as to your practice in the morning, which is kind of your motivation for the day, and that is usually described as the causal motivation. So in that moment, you're not doing anything but generate your motivation. But there's also the motivation at the time of an action. So you may be familiar with this. Oftentimes, this is explained in the context of the 12 links, and other contexts, of course, as well. The motivation before we engage in an action and during the action. And to make an effort to, well, in the morning, that's definitely the causal, getting ready for the day. And then if we can, to do it before an action, but also while we doing the action, try and remember with other people. That's most important. So the less lockdowns and stuff, we have more contact with other people, and that's when it counts. All right. Okay, great. So that's that. And then questions. Well, I'm still not done with the questions from last week. Well, it was actually Jimmy. He asked a few things, and I think they're relevant for everyone. So that's why I'd like to go through his points here. I think it may be helpful for all of you. I also received a question from Snee. let me choose up your name, Snehi, right? Am I saying it right? You sent a question, but I don't get the question. It's just a quote from the Heart Sutra, it seems.
I don't think I sent a question, Geshe-ma.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Maybe it was someone else.
Oh, okay.
No,
all right.
It was in the middle of the class, you just quoted. So I didn't know if you wanted to ask Geshe-ma something or you just quote it.
So it was maybe just a quote?
Maybe I think it was a quote.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so no, but there's still this question from Jimmy where he asks about substantiality, volume, mass. Why does that lack inherent existence? And his ideas, and I discussed it last time, parts of it, in what way we say phenomena, like even some emotions seem to be substantially existent. So using that word more as like an object of negation, but of course that's not really what he asked about. He asked like substantiality. Things seem so substantial and so like a mass of volume. We talk about the volume of matter and so forth. So to understand not just the way the 16 emptinesses are explained, how their basis lack, so the inner phenomena, outer phenomena, how they lack inherent existence, but to address a concept that is much more a concept of the 21st century, so volume, mass, substance. And anyway, he says in this, his reasoning why he believes that substantiality and volume do not exist inherently, he gives different options, the way he looks at it. So the first reason he gives for why he thinks it doesn't exist inherently, because they obstruct, of substance and volume obstruct space, while sensations and thoughts do not obstruct space. Yes, couldn't agree more. Even tactile sensation do not obstruct, because substance and volume obstruct space, while sensations and so forth do not. Even tactile sensations do not obstruct. Oh, I think you meant they do not obstruct space. Yet this is all that we experience all day long. Just bodily sensations and thoughts, nothing else. Therefore, space is never obstructed. Yeah, I think he's saying, actually, it seems to us that space is obstructed, but it isn't. Yeah, I would say, I mean, all there is tactile sensations. I mean, I don't really completely understand it, but of course, in terms of modern physics, we've heard that there's mainly space. So even an atom is mainly made of space. And as solid and as concrete as things appear to us, they're certainly not. But that's not addressing emptiness. That is just on a conventional level. Well, things appear to be a lot more solid than they actually are. And it's because of our physical, our bodily response to the objects around us that we just assume they're these solid entities. And with modern science, we know, well, that's just an appearance, but it doesn't really, phenomena don't exist that way. And we can take it further in terms of what appear to our senses. I mean, colors, when we say an object is blue or white or whatever, well, the object in actuality doesn't have a color. It's just because of the light waves, because of how our sense faculty is built, if you like. Therefore, it appears to us as blue, yellow, and so forth. So from that perspective, it's definitely, we label it onto an object. We label that color and depends on what appears to us. And of course, the way on a tactile level phenomena appear to us, water appears as wet. There's no inherent wetness in water. It's due to many different causes or many different aspects of water in connection with our skin, for instance, that water appears to us as wet and fire appears to us as hot. I mean, heat is something we experience with our body consciousness. So we don't see heat, we don't hear heat, we don't taste it, etc. It's body consciousness. So even in our mouth, if we eat hot food, it's not the tongue consciousness that experiences the heat of the food, but it's the body consciousness that it's that covers our entire body. Outside, of course, through our skin, but also, well, not the body consciousness itself, but it's the sense faculty, the body sense faculty, which then, of course, gives rise to a body consciousness. Now, that sense faculty covers our entire body externally and internally, some parts as well, of course. That's why we can feel heat in our belly, for instance, or warmth and cold, etc. So, therefore, if it wasn't for that sensation, why would we talk of? If we didn't feel heat, for us, there wouldn't be anything hot. And if other sentient beings wouldn't either, how can we say there's something hot? So it's in relation to how we experience it. Therefore, the sixth sense consciousness is there, this, that, and the other. Well, we label them as hot, as cold, as blue, as white, as round, and all that, all these different aspects, whether it's visible objects or audible objects and so forth. Well, always in relation to how we experience them. So on the basis of how they appear to our mind. And that means, in other words, in relation to, well, the different consciousnesses to which they appear. So really, based on how they appear, there are different aspects. On the basis of that, we label such and such. But they appear to us in a very unique way. I mean, like I said, modern science tells us that blue appears to the eye consciousness, whereas in actuality, that blue doesn't exist that way. So that way, I think modern science is very helpful in understanding that process. But I would still say there is blue, there's conventional blue, and here space is never obstructed. Well, yeah, it is obstructed, because in relation to my hand not being able to move through space because there is a chair in the way, I label space as obstructed. So space, of course, is only labeled when I can move my hand, when there's nothing obstructing it, or on whatever other basis, or in relation or independence on whatever other basis, we say, oh, there is space. So nothing is obstructing it. And when something cannot be moved, it doesn't have to be my hand, of course, that's just an example. But if that doesn't take place, if I cannot in an unobstructed way move my hand, for instance, well, then we say there's something obstructed. There's no inherent space, there's no inherent obstructiveness, but still conventionally, it's totally all right to talk of it. So therefore, yeah, sensations and thoughts do not obstruct space, but space is physical. And just as the mind exists as a merely labeled phenomenon, so does space, and so do objects that are conventionally obstructing space or what have you. Well, space is never obstructed. Well, space is never obstructed. No, I mean, well, space in itself is an unobstructed entity. But of course, it can be obstructed in the sense that it cannot move my hand through. So in that sense, I'm not really sure how he means this. Anyway, that's the first point he makes. And yeah, I think I'm not 100% sure what he means, but I hope I've answered it to some degree. He says also substantiality and volume are not inherently existent because the smallest substantial particle is an impossibility. I totally agree. That's a very important point, because there's no smallest entity. In that smallest, I'm not talking about physically being able to divide something further. Of course, there's a limit to how far we can go, how far we can, well, divide anything. Like we can divide up a molecule, but then not an atom, or well, even divide, even if we were able to divide all the atoms, but there would always be smaller entities. And if at some point we can no longer divide something physically, well, conceptually, mentally, we can still think of different aspects that this phenomenon is made of. It's not made of just itself, in other words. It's always made of something other than itself. We label it in dependence on certain aspects. And so these aspects are its parts, if you like. So parts doesn't always mean parts like something we can see with our eye consciousness, for instance. It doesn't mean that, but anything that it consists of, that is not itself. So we can go endlessly because we'll never find a partless particle. And that's definitely a reason for why saying physical phenomena, since they're made of physical parts, so whether you want to call it energy in the end or waves or whatever, but the point is they're always made of something other than themselves. They're like a composition or component, or like formed from different aspects, and there's never going to be a partless particle that is just made of itself. That's impossible. And the Prasangika, that's the Prasangika view. Actually, according to the lower school, the Svatantrika Madhyamika, which is just right below the Prasangika, which is very similar to the Prasangika. But the difference between those two schools, and one of the main differences is, as you probably remember, but just to remind you, so they say that, okay, phenomena are labeled, they're imputed. We impute, for instance, person, we impute table, we impute, a car, we impute a car. But the Prasangika school, whereas they both agree that the car is labeled, but the Prasangika school would say you have a labeled car and there's nothing coming from the side of the object, from the side of the car, that is findable as the essence of the car. In the end, it's just labeled, and you can never find some kind of carness, some essence of the car. And you can never find some essence of a table. You always, when you look for the car among its parts, you always find something that is not a car. The Svatantrika school would say, well, that's tricky. If you say that, when that's the difference between a table and a car. I mean, if in the end you divide it up endlessly and you never find anything, how can one thing be a table and one thing can be a car? I mean, they would be the same. So just the variety of phenomena, they just wouldn't be possible. And that's really a very potent argument. It's really difficult for our mind to get around that. But on one hand, I think just because we're so used to having a sense there's really something there that makes this a car and this a table, in actuality, that cannot be posited. We cannot posit this entity. And so with the person, the Svatantrika Madhyamika school, so the Prasangika, the high school we're studying, they're saying nothing can be found. There's nothing in terms of the person that can be found that makes that the essence of the person. The Svatantrika school would say, oh, there is something there. What is there? It is the mental consciousness. If you look for the person to find some essence, it's the mental consciousness. It makes sense that they choose the mental consciousness because that's the most important aggregate. But of course, that is also merely labeled, and you can take that apart and never find an essence of the mental consciousness. You can divide it into moments in time and you don't find an essence. So therefore, the Svatantrika school saying, okay, with the person is the mental consciousness, which of course the Prasangika school would not agree with, but still. However, how are they going to say there's something findable? What are they going to posit when it comes to a table or a car? When they say you find some essence, there's no mental consciousness that they can posit. A car or a table doesn't have a mental consciousness. So really what they end up having to say, which they wouldn't say actually because they don't accept partless particles, but in the end they would have to posit a partless particle. Like you go further and further and further, and at some point you can no longer divide something, and that should be the essence of the object. It could be only that, right? So there's this whole argument, therefore, really, if anyone insists on inherent existence, that there's something findable, they have, if it's a physical phenomenon made of atoms, made of subtle particles, if those are the building blocks of that phenomenon, then it should be a partless particle. What else are you going to find? If it's not partless, you can divide it up further. So he's right with that. Definitely, I would totally agree with him. Since there's no smallest substantial particle, therefore, there is no inherent substance. Yeah, but this I would agree. This is the first one, I'm not so sure. Anyway, that should be enough, but I still thought it was interesting, his way of thinking, and I think it's relevant for all of us, because it's like some of these ideas that are set forth here, we don't necessarily understand them. The 18 elements, the 12 sense sources, the 5 aggregates, we don't think along these lines so much, you know, when we talk to other people, when we go to school, what we learned. It's like the physical objects, the substances around us, the mass around us. So we need to now translate that they don't exist inherently. What is meant with that? The physical aspects around us, physical objects, they appear so solid, but they're merely labeled on the basis of parts that can be further divided, and those are again just labeled, and those are again just labeled, and those are endlessly. All right. And if it wasn't for partless particles, you couldn't have that endless process, but there's an endless process. And of course, then mental, you don't have those particles, you have moments, different aspects, you know, a problem is not physical or mental, it's an impermanent phenomenon that's neither form nor consciousness. So a problem, but it's impermanent, and it's also labeled on the basis of many different aspects. So we should take a problem, right? Because what upsets us are problems. Simple as that. If we get upset about something, we're depressed about something, we're sad about something, it's usually a problem. So where's the problem within the problem, right? Where's that problem? We usually feel like, yeah, I know that. I've understood that. It's so easy. I know a car can be taken apart, but really do it. Take a particular problem that really upsets you and start literally, of course, you can't take it apart in the sense that you can take apart a car, but take it, like, what makes it a problem? Where's the problem within the problem? The person saying that? The words of the person? Each letter is the problem? The motivation of the person? Just the motivation? If it wasn't the words the person had said, then just the motivation, I don't even know about it. All their thoughts directed at me? Where's this I that was heard, right? If you really take it to that level, you get so busy just searching for it, you kind of forget your problem. Okay, anyway, all right. So, but let's go back to the text. We've been discussing these 16 aspects, and the most extensive of these 16 aspects of emptiness is the emptiness of the defining characteristics. That is emptiness number 14. 13 we did last time. We talked about phenomena. It was a very unusual way of dividing phenomena, but I hope I've explained it to some degree. That was clear enough. That was verse, 201, the first 2 lines of 201. First 2 lines. So those explain the emptiness of all phenomena in the way we've heard, well, by way of the different elements, the 18 elements and so forth. So it was actually verse 200 and verse 201, the first 2 lines. So it was 6 lines altogether. And now, and we also got to that already, now the emptiness of the defining characteristics, which there's a brief presentation, the last 2 lines of verse 201. Last 2 lines of verse 201, yes. The formable and so on lack their own beings. This is emptiness of defining characteristics. Okay, so the formable means really that which is suitable to be something physical. Physical objects are usually defined as that which is suitable to be physical, suitable to be materiality, as Geshe translates it. So suitable to be for materiality, suitable to be form. So it's suitable to be something physical. Doesn't tell us that much, but anyway, that's the definition of form, and so on. So explaining anything that exists from the point of view of being defining characteristics of something. Right? Everything has characteristics, but everything is also a characteristic of something else. Okay. I'm a person, I have characteristics, but I'm also a characteristic of humankind. I'm, of course, part of the humankind, but also a characteristic. That way it can be seen as a defining characteristic. Well, depends, but the point is, like, in a way, everything can be the defining characteristic of something else. But seeing it from that point of view. So here the Tibetan word Geshe translates it as defining characteristic, but actually it's definition. But definition is, in the way we like to look at it in the West, is much more of like a whole statement about such and such. So no, actually definition in Tibetan means the unique characteristics of something. Anyway, so here, just a brief explanation. So something physical and so on. So mental, anything that exists, lack their own beings, which is the emptiness of defining characteristics. And then the text gives an explanation, an extensive explanation, defining these characteristics from the point of view of being a basis, from the point of view of being a path, and from the point of view of being a result. So, and it makes perfect sense, taking it not just in terms of what exists and what is, existent phenomena like defining characteristics, but where are defining characteristics important? They're important in the context of the Dharma. And this way of talking about a basis, he used the word ground, which is just another way of saying basis. So really, when we practice the Dharma, a way to describe the Dharma, well, it contains, the Dharma refers to a basis, a path, and a result. So what is the Buddha Dharma? Well, it sets forth basis, path, and result. Path, I think, well, result is kind of starting from result. Result is like, well, we're aiming for something. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to suffer. So why did the Buddha teach? Well, what did the Buddha teach? The Buddha taught a system that leads us towards a state that is free from suffering. That is the result. That's why Buddhism was taught. And there's a way to get there. That's the path, the means and methods to take us there, to that state free from suffering, which we so instinctively wish. We all wish to be free. We wish to have this lasting happiness, and that can be achieved by way of the means, which are the path. But for the path is a mind, is a consciousness. It needs a certain object. It needs an object that it understands. Why? Because the opposite of a path, that which keeps us trapped in samsara. So a path is that which takes us out of samsara, out of our suffering existence. The opposite of that is that which keeps us trapped. So our misapprehension of reality. And that mind is a mind, the object of which doesn't exist. Okay, so if you think of even the afflictive emotions, anger, aversion, attachment, they all have an object. Mind always has, any type of consciousness always has an object, always has a content. I mean, even if you black out, then it's just blackness, but something appears to the mind. Something appears to the mind at all times. The mind, consciousness cannot be without an object. We cannot be without mind, and our mind can never be without an object. So mind is always there. Mental consciousness at the very least. When we're asleep, even when we're dying, even when we're unconscious. Unconscious doesn't mean there's no consciousness. It means there is no coarse consciousness. There's no sense consciousness active. But consciousness is always there, and it always has an object. And it is those minds that are causing us trouble. Their objects don't exist. They take on an object. It's not saying they don't have an object appearing to them, but that which appears has no standing, has no basis in reality. Anger, what was the object of anger? An exaggerated negativity, exaggerated version of the negativity that we observe in a person, that which makes us angry. So if we're angry with a person, we don't see this person for who they are any longer. Our anger focuses on the person who's become one with this negativity, who's become, and that negativity the person is the negativity. Negativity is that person, and it's exaggerated. So this, whatever's made us angry, we've exaggerated that negativity. Attachment is the other way around, is whatever we attach to, it's that positive aspect. We of course attach to the person, but we see that positive aspect, that pleasant aspect, whatever it is, we see that as one with that person, as inseparable from that person. We don't realize the pleasant feeling is with our own mind, but we then label pleasant on that person and believe this pleasantness is within that person. So first we just label, oh, that's a pleasant person, or whatever is the label. I'm just using one label. So pleasant. But then we think this pleasantness is inherent in that person, it's within this person. And we can only see that pleasantness and believe our well-being from now on is dependent on that person. So it's got no basis in reality. The pleasure was here and not in that person. So this pleasantness, therefore, not being intrinsic in that person, we're wrong with regard to that, but this exaggeration. Okay, so the point is, any type of mind that causes us suffering, its object never exists. Okay, which is why the basis becomes so important. The basis means that which exists. The basis is that which exists. If we want to generate a path consciousness to get the corresponding result, we need to understand what exists and what doesn't, to be able to develop minds, the objects of which exist. In particular, on a conventional level, that phenomena are merely labeled, on an ultimate level, that they don't exist inherently. But there's also all this stuff in between. They change all the time. There is no person who's totally bad. People have good qualities and negative qualities, and this negativity of that person, it's not one with that person, and it doesn't exist in that exaggerated way. So all that we need to understand, and that's what the basis provides us with. Okay, so the defining characteristic from the point of view being the basis of what needs to be understood, the defining characteristics from the point of view of the different types of mind that take us towards the state of freedom from suffering, the path, and the defining characteristics of the result. And those all lack inherent existence, by the way. And now in this context, of course, what's usually done, the emptiness doesn't need to be explained. Really, we understand that, but we need to take those into consideration. The objects themselves first kind of have some understanding of them, and most of them you understand anyway, but have some understanding to then understand what are their bases of imputation, and that they're merely labeled. All right, so let's start with the defining characteristics of the factors on the ground, Okay, so what are they? The 5 aggregates. Those are verses 202 to 204. Those are the 5 aggregates. Let me just check. Yeah, it's 3 verses. Those are the 5 aggregates, the 18 elements. We've already had them mentioned before. They were mentioned before, but now they're in the context, they're described from the point of view of being the basis that we need to understand, but also from the point of view of their emptiness, from the point of view of their base, from the point of view of being defining characteristics. The ones that are explicitly described here are the contaminated ones. But of course, the grounds, the basis also includes the uncontaminated ones. So what exists? The 5 aggregates, that which experiences suffering, mind and body, the 5 aggregates. Why? Because of the 18 elements, the objects around us, including the objects around us. In what way? Because there are these sense fields or these sense sources that give rise to our awareness of them. Okay. So in that sense here, explicitly what is described are as a ground, understanding what is responsible for our suffering. But of course, you could also talk of the ground from the point of view of the uncontaminated aggregates, but that's actually more part of the result. And so here it's more like understanding our predicament. So the basis as in like what we need to understand, what's wrong with our situation right now. All right. So anyway, here we describe what is described in verses, verse 202, and the first 3 lines of verse 203 is the 5 aggregates. Okay. Form, of course, is that which is capable of materiality, or capable of being something physical. So it's our body. It refers mainly to our body here. Feeling and discrimination. I sometimes call it discernment. Those are mental functions. Actually, if you describe feeling, discrimination, and mental formations, those are the 3 aggregates. Well, there's form, there's consciousness, or awareness, as he calls it. No, he calls it consciousness. So form and consciousness. Form is easy, it's the physical body. Easy, kind of, well, easily explained. But then you have feeling, discrimination, and mental formations. Well, that's to say this much. Actually, our mind, simply spoken, there's a body and there's consciousness. That twofold division perfectly works. However, there's a different way to describe consciousness. Consciousness, of course, being in the forefront, being most important in the Buddhist context. So many different explanations of consciousness, many different ways of dividing consciousness are given. And so one way to divide consciousness is from the point of view of its functions. Consciousness has a very basic function. What is the most basic function of consciousness? Is to apprehend its object. Just to apprehend its object itself, the object itself. So if you take a table, the function of consciousness, that table appears and table is understood, is known. That is the basic function of consciousness. From the point of view of that function, awareness, consciousness, from the point of view of that function is called main mind. From the point of view of that function is called main mind, or here simply consciousness. But our mind does so much more. I mean, our mind has so many different abilities, more than just apprehending just in general an object. It does so much more. For instance, when you look at this object, there's a certain feeling. There's a feeling there, feeling pleasant or unpleasant. When I see this table, if I really like this table and I just lost it, and then someone brings it back and I see this table, there's pleasure, right? Wow, how nice, my table, okay? Or I don't know, if I don't like this table, I think it's really ugly, and someone has just put it in my room and it has to stay there now, and there's an unpleasant feeling. So this mind that perceives the table also has the function of experiencing pleasure, displeasure, or something which is neither pleasurable nor which is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, just neutral. Okay, but there's always that. That's also a function of the mind. There's always that feeling. But the mind also has this function of not just perceiving the table, but being able to look at the different aspects of the table and being able to discern, to discriminate. So this is this part of the table, this is that part, this is not part of the table. Our mind has that function. And from the point of view of these different functions, from the point of view of experiencing pleasure, we call, just from the point of view of awareness, from that point of view, we call it feeling. From the point of view of being able to discern, looking at the different aspects of an object, the different signs, as they're called, signs as in like the sign that it's a table, so the defining parts of this table. So this ability to do that, or from the point of view of this function, we call it discrimination. Feeling is not discrimination. Discrimination is not feeling, which means actually a mind feels something and a mind discriminates. It can do both, but from the point of view of experiencing feeling, from the point of view of discerning, that's different. Just seen from that perspective. Awareness just seen from that perspective is not awareness seen from a different perspective, right? So we separate these functions to understand them better. Feeling, very important. Discrimination, very important. Feeling governs our life. Our whole life revolves around the feelings we have. I mean, we crave some, we don't want others. we go nuts for feeling. I mean, seriously, anything we do, pleasant feelings, that's it, right? I mean, the whole world revolves around those. Those are not emotions. Emotions are something different. But emotions come with certain feelings. If you have the emotion of fear, so we don't want fear only because it doesn't feel good. If fear felt good, we would like it. Like, you know, when you're on a roller coaster, it's also kind of a fear, but it gives you like a sense of excitement. Some people like that. I don't like it. Ooh, I hate it. I would not go on a roller coaster. But some people love it, that kind of feeling of fear and excitement, or watching like a horror movie. Oh no, it's not my thing. But I know people love it, you know, being scared. So this feeling of fear, certain kind of fear, comes along with a pleasant feeling. And so you want more of it. And certain feelings of anger, they may give you a relief. So you're like, oh, that really made me feel good. I want to do it again. Beating up this person, you know, whatever. So you associate it with something positive. Now we need to be aware, emotions versus feeling. Every type of mind comes along with that. And many are neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But our mind has this tendency to hold on to pleasant ones right away. We may not be aware of it. So very important to watch out for feeling. And discernment, discrimination, I mean, very important mental function that helps us to make sense of things around us, right? Make sense of the things around us. So those two are described separately. But then you have mental formation. So mental formation is kind of the aggregate, the third aggregate, where anything that is not the other four is part of this. Okay, anything that's not physical, anything that is not a mental, that is not an awareness from the point of view of feeling pleasure or experiencing pleasure, something pleasure, displeasure, or a neutral feeling, that is anything that is not that, anything that is not an awareness from the point of view of discerning its object, and anything that is not consciousness, just awareness from the point of view of the most simple function that every mind has, of just an object appearing and being aware of that object. Anything that's not those is part of mental formations. Now, there's so many mental functions, so many different ones. I mean, at the very least, if it's to be taken literally, 84,000. Why? Because the Buddha said that there are 84,000 different afflictive emotions, and those are all mental functions. Every afflictive emotion is a certain function of the mind. It functions in a certain way. So at least you have 84,000, and then you have the virtuous ones, etc. Though 84,000 it's probably just a large number. I don't know how many there are exactly. Hard to say. I mean, it's just different ways of labeling them and subdividing them. But the point being, in the Abhidharma Kosha, Vasubandhu describes 46 different mental factors. That is the lower Abhidharma. It's lower in the sense that there's a higher Abhidharma. That's Asanga's compendium of Abhidharma. So in Vasubandhu's treasury of Abhidharma, he describes 46 different mental factors, which is not seen as lower in the sense it's not as accepted as the higher Abhidharma, which is Asanga's, like I said, compendium of Abhidharma, in which 51 mental factors are mentioned. And so these 51, those are the ones that are usually explained in the context of explaining these mental factors, other than just awareness, the most basic function of awareness itself, which is described by way of saying a main mind. So therefore, mental formations, this aggregate of mental formations, 2 mental factors of the 51 were already given. So 49 are part of the mental formations. And of course, there are more than those, but let's just stick to the 51. So mental formations, this category of the aggregates contains the 49 other mental factors. And what else do we have that is not the body, that is not consciousness in the form of a mental factor or a main mind? Well, we have the imprints left on our mind, so many different types of them, and they're not the mind itself, and they are manifesting in the form of karmic imprints, right? Something left on our mind that has the potential to create something. What does it create? A future experience, or imprints left from doing something repeatedly, so forming a habit, ripening in the form of doing it over and over again, or in the form of obstructing our mind from knowing all phenomena, so cognitive obscuration. So every thought leaves something behind in our mind, and depending on how that works, how that functions, we label it this imprint or that imprint, and they're all part of mental formations. Even the impermanence of our mind and body, it's also mental formation. It's part of our who we are. Our impermanence is a quality, it's a characteristic of our mind and body, and that's also mental formations. It's part of our aggregates, it's inseparable. So the impermanence of our mind and body is also part of the aggregate of mental formations. It's not form, it's not feeling, it's not discrimination, it's not consciousness. Okay. In fact, our impermanence is neither consciousness nor something physical. It's not physical, it's not mental. It's part of us, therefore it's part of the 5 aggregates, part of mental formation. So mental formation is almost like, you've got so many other aspects, let's just have one category that all the other ones fit in. So in other words, consciousness is important, the most basic function, main mind or consciousness, that basic function is important. Body is important. Feeling and discernment, or feeling and discrimination, they should also be mentioned separately because they play such a huge part in our life. And then everything else is kind of part of this mental formations. Okay, so this is who we are. This is who we are. So there's our body, not that much time is spent with the body. Obviously, it's only got one aggregate. Only one aggregate describes the body. So of course it's an important vessel, etc. But obviously with the mind, much more attention is given to the mind, to consciousness, the mental factors, of course, and then consciousness, just its function itself. So it gives us, I think the explanation of the 5 aggregates is a really nice way of describing who we are. I mean, it's not a way in which we grew up to think of a person, but if you're more familiar with it, it makes total sense. And those 5 aggregates are samsara. That's what's described. My 5 aggregates is my samsara. Your 5 aggregates are your samsara. And of course, you have your unique experience. Because of our 5 aggregates, we perceive this world in a very unique way. Okay. So it's like I said, it's kind of similar. We're never moving away from the Chitta Mantra school to the degree as we may expect, because my 5 aggregates are responsible for me seeing water in the case of a liquid, whereas the 5 aggregates of person of the Preta realm sees pus and blood, and a celestial being perceives this. And of course, we shouldn't take it like literally. Every time you see water, you're thinking, oh, there must be like a Preta being hovering over the same liquid, and right now being like, no, it's just, but you see, like, this is how I think of other realms of existence, right? When we hear rebirth is a difficult one, and other realms of existence, we have a hard time accepting that. But honestly, there's so much we don't perceive around us. I mean, how arrogant are we to think we're the only living beings in the universe? There are not other planets. And even further than that, there are not other realms of existence where there are phenomena. Our sense consciousnesses simply cannot perceive them because we haven't got the karma. We didn't have the karma to be reborn in those states. Instead, we were born with a human body, a human mind, and thus experience what is unique to humans, to human beings, right? It makes perfect sense that these other realms, they're different minds, different karmas, perceiving different things. Why should there just be my karma, my human karma, and maybe animal karma, and that's it? Because I cannot see it. And there's no scientists who so far discovered the existence. I mean, I'm sure there's scientific means, we just don't know them. It's really interesting. Sorry, I'm just rambling here, but it's so interesting how modern science, and any scientist probably feels they've discovered anything that is to be discovered. I mean, nowadays, a lot of people like when I say something about this kind of like address it even to someone who has a background in Buddhism and so forth, and talk about the different realms, and they're like, well, scientists have not proven it to exist. Well, not yet. It's not like they've discovered everything that is discoverable. There's so much still left. But there's a sense, yeah, if it was there, scientists would know it. So there's no rebirth because they haven't proven it yet. Anyway, so if we have a hard time with rebirth and the different realms, I know I'm moving away a little bit from emptiness, but it's all connected. So this gives me an opportunity to say so. Check yourself. Why do you have a hard time? What is it that's keeping you from thinking that's impossible? Because you cannot see it, because no one else you know talks about it. Scientists, we all know those are not enough reasons. And here, the idea of the 5 aggregates, the 5 aggregates being the basis for what we perceive, together with the karmic imprints, that it's not that we walk into this world and we objectively, there's an objective world and we perceive it as it is. If we can move away from that, then it makes much more sense. Anyway, the 5 aggregates, therefore, they are that with which we experience samsara. And then it goes on to say, so form is defined as capable of materiality, the text says. Feeling has the nature of an experience. Discrimination apprehends the signs. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So form is defined as capable of materiality. I said that, suitable as something material or physical. Feeling has the nature of an experience, experiencing pleasure and so forth. Discrimination apprehends the signs, the defining characteristic, the main signs of that being a table and something else not being it. So it can discriminate between table and not table. Mental formations construct. So construct in the sense that, well, they construct the rest of our reality, I suppose you could say. Conditioned phenomena, so an aggregate distinct from the other 4 aggregates, so it's distinct from the other ones, in that sense, maybe construct. And then awareness, this is what Lama Tsongkhapa, how Lama Tsongkhapa puts it, so construct conditioned phenomena, and it is an aggregate distinct from the other 4 aggregates. So it constructs the rest of the reality, I guess you could say, through the different functions and of course the imprints. Then there's awareness of specific objects, just objects, of visible objects, sounds, and so forth. So that is the defining mark of consciousness, just the awareness of the different objects that exist. Aggregates are characterized by suffering, and our aggregates are such that they're in the nature of suffering. They were created by karma and afflictions. That is the 3rd type of suffering. The basis for all other sufferings are our 5 aggregates. So they're characterized by suffering. They're in the nature of suffering. Okay, we discussed this before. No need to go through it again. And then there are the elements. Their nature is akin to a venomous snake. It's like these objects around us. So in the form of the 5 objects, the sense sources, consciousness, but just from the point of view of causing us to suffer. So a venomous snake, it's not saying poison. Poison, it almost seems like we have some control over taking it or not, ingesting it or not ingesting it. Whereas like a poisonous, a venomous snake, it's like without us doing much, we get bitten by it and suffer from it. So the elements, from the point of view of the, I guess, the objects of the objects around us, our environment, etc. So the aggregates, part of who we are, and then the elements from the point of view of causing us suffering, like the venomous snake. And the sense fields are the sense, is that from the point of view of the cause for consciousness. So you need to have the objects, but you need to have the sense faculties, for instance, serving as a sense source to give rise to awareness, so that there's the feeling of suffering, that there is the experience of suffering, and so forth. So in that way, the Buddha said that they are the doorways to the arising of suffering. Okay, so having the 5 aggregates, then the objects and the sense sources, they all give rise to our suffering. All that is dependently originated is characterized by composition. Composition here in the context of impermanent. Of course, even permanent phenomena are dependently originated, have dependently arisen. But when we talk about suffering, suffering is not caused by permanent things. Suffering it's caused by impermanent phenomena. So when we think of the 12 links, there's an example of something being impermanent, where one factor leads to the next, and so leads to the next, and so forth. And just taking our basic misapprehension, giving rise to the rest of it. So that is 204, up to 204. That's the basis. That is our basis. So understanding the basis and understanding none of those exist inherently. They all lack inherent existence. Then we have the path. So I go a little bit into the path. I hope it's all right. We've done only 3 verses so far, so allow me to do a little bit more because it's not difficult. Then you have the path. So we need to understand that to get out of samsara, we need to understand that is our predicament. And of course, this is all reality. This is true. This is on a conventional level, it will make sense. So how do we get out of this? Through certain means. Well, first, the 6 perfections are described. Giving. There's giving. Generosity, which is really like, it's just a mental factor. It's a mental factor from the point of view of just wishing to give. It's kind of it's a virtuous kind of determination to a certain degree, not just aspiration, but also a determination to give. And it can be giving anything, material things, but not just material things. I mean, giving protection, helping others, giving the Dharma in the sense, not preaching it, but teaching it through our own example. That's a kind of generosity, giving to others, inspiring others. So there's so much that can be given. That is giving. Okay, the opposite of just wanting to keep. Based on that, based on that mental factor, we label generosity. Generosity is not the act of giving itself. It's the mental factor. It's really the mental factor. That is generosity. We think of generosity, we always think of giving to someone. I mean, a person being generous or not, it just depends on the mental factor, of course. Okay, so giving is that which defines the perfection of generosity. So the perfection of generosity is really once you have bodhicitta, so not just generosity, but the perfection of generosity. Here it talks of the path towards enlightenment. And so you need the perfection of generosity. So the perfection of generosity is defined in different ways, but there's one way to see it as a path. In particular, once you realize emptiness. Once you realize emptiness and you have bodhicitta, then there's the perfection of generosity. You engage in the perfection of generosity. And then there's discipline. Some say that only a Buddha has the perfection of generosity, but there's also, and that we only practice the perfection of generosity. But in some scriptures, it is also said that also bodhisattvas, once they realize emptiness, once they have bodhicitta, they have the perfection of generosity. So it's just a different way of applying the term. But in terms of the meaning, nothing's changed. And then there's discipline, ethical discipline, the absence of torment. Okay, so the absence of afflictions. Forbearance is the absence of anger. And anger has many different levels, but like forbearance, being patient with suffering, being patient with another person harming us, being patient with those learning the scriptures. So there's so many different types of forbearance. Diligence, joyous effort. So it's the absence of unwholesome actions. So with joy, with delight, engaging in wholesome actions. Therefore, diligence. So when that mental factor is active, then from the point of view of that mental factor, an awareness from the point of view of that mental factor is called diligence. So these sub-moments, it's made of different moments. It has to be a continuum of moments of awareness. None of them is diligence. So all of them coming together as a continuum, that is called diligence. Does it exist in and of itself? No, it doesn't. It's merely labeled. But as a labeled conventional phenomena, it exists. Meditative absorption is characterized by focus. Oh yeah, it's focused on one object. It's not scattered all over. wisdom by the absence of attachment. So wisdom, of course, understanding how phenomena really exist, which if we don't understand it on the subtlest level, in the sense of not on the ultimate level, not understanding that phenomena do not exist inherently, of course, that gives rise to attachment to self and attachment to my happiness and so forth. But here, well, attachment, which is well, it's absence of attachment, because wisdom really on the level of the ultimate truth overcomes attachment. Okay, but again, only from the point of view of that function, and awareness from the point of view of that function, that is called wisdom. It doesn't exist inherently. Okay, so that should be enough. We've covered quite a few verses, and it wasn't that hard. It's going to be a little bit harder. Oh, so no, sorry, I should read the last two lines as well. I forgot. So these then are the defining characteristics of the 6 perfections, verse 206. Okay, so I've sped once again, but yes, I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with these ideas. And just briefly, I sometimes forget to summarize, but briefly to bring it together again, what we've learned is the following. Emptiness from the point of view of phenomena being defining characteristics. So we label them defining characteristics, and that, of course, we just label them, they don't exist inherently, but conventionally they're defining characteristics. And we can subdivide defining characteristics in the basis that needs to be understood, in the path that needs to be developed, and in the result that needs to be actualized. So, which is a way to divide the Buddhist path. Then from the point of view of the basis or the ground, so defining characteristics serving as a ground, well, a basis here, the 5 aggregates, the elements, and the sense faculties, or the sense sources, sense fields. In the sense that, well, we need to recognize suffering. We need to recognize more than that, the true truth and so forth. So sometimes the basis is described saying the true truth. But here's from the point of view of seeing our predicament, suffering. Suffering in the form of, well, the 5 aggregates, since we have the contaminated 5 aggregates. And then you have the elements, the 18 elements, seeing them from the point of view of like objects, and the sense sources, from the point of view of giving rise to awareness, of giving rise to consciousness. So all of those together are the basis for suffering. And none of those aspects, we went through the different the aggregates, the elements, and of course the sense faculties, none of those exist inherently. From the point of view of their different parts, their different defining, again, they're also made of defining characteristics. So based on all those, we label them. They're merely labeled. But being merely labeled, that's why they're fully functioning. And since they're influenced by afflictive emotions, well, they give rise to suffering. But that being our predicament, that being the basis, that being our reality, now we need to generate different types of awareness, especially if we want to actualize our fullest potential, which is Buddhahood. There's certain awarenesses we need to develop. Of course, bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and together with that, the 6 paramitas. Okay, so giving and so forth. I explained all those. And those are defining characteristics. So here they're described from the point of view of their defining characteristics. So here it's more that these are described from the point of view of their defining characteristics. I should say they are defining characteristics themselves, but they're mainly set forth in these verses here by way of their defining characteristics. Okay, form, feeling, and so forth. And those, of course, again, lack inherent existence. Discipline and absence of torment, forbearance, the absence of anger, all their defining characteristics, we lack inherent existence. And if their defining characteristics lack inherent existence, those objects, those phenomena, such as the 5 aggregates, the 6 perfections, they of course also lack inherent existence. All right. I hope I've not confused you too much. I've really gone fast today, but yeah, I don't want to spend too much on each of those verses because it's really not that much part of this particular topic. It's not this treatise on the middle way. I mean, it's Chandrakirti's text, like, no, it's not called treatise, but entering into the middle way. So this treatise is mainly on emptiness. So I don't want to spend that much time on these different aspects, and that's why I'm just going through them a little bit quickly. But what I need to explain next time will be the 37 factors to enlightenment, just briefly, so you have a sense of what they are. His Holiness mentions them again and again. Very, very important, and you're probably aware of them to a certain degree. So I want to kind of spend some time on them, but again, I won't spend that much time on them. All right. Now we have some time to meditate. Ooh, not much time left. Again, I'm a little bit gone over time. So let's just let go of any confusion, disruptive thoughts, if we can, any mental exhaustion. And just focus on the breath for a few moments. So with regard to emptiness, it's important to understand that phenomena being labeled on the basis of their, or dependence on their defining characteristics, that these defining characteristics themselves are merely labeled. Do not exist inherently. So if we divide defining characteristics into the basis, the path, and the result, in relation to the Dharma, then we can think of the basis from the point of view of the 5 aggregates, the elements such as the 6 sense objects, and the sense sources, like the eye sense faculty, and so on. Five aggregates, being that which is the foundation for suffering. It's samsara. What is the defining characteristic of our body? It's our physical basis for our mind. It's just merely labeled. And there's feeling. Which is so important in our life. Its defining characteristic is the experience, pleasure, and so forth. Yeah, that experiencing function of the mind does not exist from its own side. Likewise, in the case of discrimination, which is defined by apprehending the specific signs or specific attributes of something. But apprehending such signs or attributes is also merely labeled. Without being findable. And then there's mental formations. defining characteristic of which is that it constructs our reality through all the other mental factors and the different imprints. They're all parts of this aggregate of mental formation. Yet free from existing truly and inherently. Likewise, consciousness the basic function of the mind of just apprehending its object. It's merely labeled. And then there are the elements. That are just ripe, like a venomous snake. As resembling that which poisons us. And again, it's just labeled. As are the sense sources, being the doorway to our different sufferings. Yet only conventionally so. But even the defining characteristics of those awarenesses that eliminate our suffering, like the perfection of generosity, which is defined by the act of giving. That's just labeled. as our ethical discipline. The defining characteristic of which is the absence of any harmful action. Which again has no existence from its own side. It is merely labeled. And the same is true for forbearance, diligence, meditative absorption, and wisdom. Although leading us towards the enlightened state of a Buddha, they too have no existence from their own side. As their defining characteristics are also merely labeled. And now to conclude this short analysis, whatever insight you've gained through going through the emptiness of all these defining characteristics, spend a moment to single-pointedly focus on that insight. And then let's dedicate all the virtue we've accumulated together. First of all, of course, let's dedicate it towards our enlightenment. May it become a cause for us to attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. But may it also become a cause for our precious lamas, our precious guides, who manifests in different forms, to have an extremely long life, remain healthy and strong, so that they continue to teach us through their examples and through their wisdom. And finally, may our virtue help right now those who are sick, like Geshe and Tali Lubin, to recover very, very soon. But may also soften the hearts and bring love and compassion in the minds of those decision makers who right now are creating war and conflict in this world. So that there be no more suffering or war. And of course, then let's dedicate the way Shantadewas describes it. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. All right, thank you very much. Sorry if today I went for a really long time. Just to remind you, next week, don't forget, is the altruistic attitude. So it's determination this time in combination with bodhicitta. Okay. So be safe.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Night.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Laila to.
Laila
Night,
to.
Geshe-ma.
Thank you, Kashima.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.